Okay, so hi everyone and welcome on our third seminar, the seminar where we finally don't have any technical problems and can start more or less in time. So today we have Alberto Hidalgo from Scuola IMT Lucca, and Alberto will tell us today about tourism and urban revival. So floor is yours, Alberto. Good luck.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Katerina, for inviting me here to present my job market paper that has as a title, Your Room is Ready, Tourism and Urban Revival. So let's talk a bit about tourism. Despite this crucial role as a worldwide contributor to the GDP and employment, economics has often disregarded tourism as a, let's say, as economic field of research. It is true that in the past, tourism was only a concern to certain countries, and within those countries to certain areas of those countries. However, the recent tourism boom, mainly motivated and driven by the improvement in transport connection and also the phenomenon of the globalization, have driven tourism flows towards cities and has raised numerous concerns. At the heart of this growth, there are hotels, which do not only change the economic landscape of the nearby areas, but also trigger economic spillover effects across the city. So, hotels are crucial to urban economics due to the service that they provide, which are inherently non-tradable. So they must be consumed where they are produced. This form of trade, in which consumers travel to suppliers, can lead to a change in the local consumption, in the local economic activities. And the overall effect, let's say, is ambiguous. Why is that? Because on the one hand, hotels, and in specific, and tourism in general, can be considered as a market expansion externality, since they attract new income flows from tourists in the form of an increase in the expenditure of tourists in the nearby areas. However, this increase in new tourist flows may displace not only residents, but also local business. And when I'm talking here about local business, I am meaning resident-oriented business. So the overall effect at the first stage might be ambiguous. We may see an increase in the number of tourist-oriented activities, but also a decrease in resident-oriented activities. So the sign of these effects is uncertain. Moreover, hotels may also impact the real estate market. And here we can find a depriving effect or a regeneration effect. On the one hand, hotels may impact negatively the housing prices and the rental prices if they substitute residential facilities for accommodation facilities. This is the main channel through which short-term rental companies like Airbnb are impacting the real estate market. So in the past, there were long-term rental contracts. Now, this new technology, this new platform economy allow you to short-term rental your own apartment, and therefore there is a substitution, a switch between long-term rental contracts towards short-term rental contracts. And therefore there is a decrease in the housing supply and an impact in the rental prices. Moreover, hotels might also increase the rental prices through an amenity effects. Hotels usually are settled in new or renovated buildings, and therefore may improve the overall attractiveness in the area. On the other hand, hotels bring with themselves tourists that may cause nuisance and congestion in the areas, and therefore impact negatively the rental market. Finally, the impact in the rental sector can further contribute to change the economic landscape in the area by displacing financial constrained standalone business in favor of business group. And why is that? Because now the commercial rents have increased, and therefore a small standalone business and small companies cannot afford to pay these commercial rents, and big companies and big corporations take advantage of it. All in all, hotels exert and demand and supply pressure in the local economy, in the labor market, and also in the land market, making the overall economic impact ambiguous, and therefore an interesting research question worth of investigating. And this will be the goal of this paper, to study the impact of hotel openings on urban transformation, and I will use the city of Madrid as a case of study. I will measure urban transformation from different angles, like the number of establishments, employment, the building renovation permits, and also the rental prices. Moreover, I will leverage the temporal dimension of my data that allow me to isolate the impact of hotels on the local economy from other recent trends like Airbnb. So basically, my time frame will be from 2001 until 2010. And therefore, I am picking the time frame where there were not short-term rental units in Madrid. And this is done since I am interested to analyze the causal effect of hotels on the city. Well, by now you might be guessing, okay, but you cannot compare areas in the city where there were hotel openings with other areas in the city. And therefore, in order to solve for this non-random location of hotel openings across the city, I propose for the first time a novel instrumental strategy that consists in using the number of protected buildings as an instrument for hotel location. Why the number of protected buildings? Well, first, let me try to describe you what is a protected building. A protected building is a kind of historic building that due to their aesthetics, it might be preserved by the city council. So you may find protected buildings in almost any city across the world. And these kind of protected buildings, as I say, it might be an historic building, but also it can be a building that due to their aesthetics, the beauty is protected by the city council. And therefore, any kind of modification in this protected building is subject to the approval of the city council. So someone cannot do anything or whatever they want with this protected building. You must, for instance, do not change the facade. You cannot change also, depending on the protection of the building, you cannot allow different land uses. And therefore, these protected buildings are quite problematic. But why hotels are taking and are reconverting these protected buildings for accommodation facilities? Well, mainly because hotels have the capacity to invest and buy these protected buildings and convert it in accommodation facility due to consumers highly value being hosted in these kind of facilities. So there is a large literature field of research that have found that one of the most important price determinants in the hotel pricing strategies is to be host in a protected building, because hotel guests value to be host in this kind of facilities. And this is important since hotels can take advantage of it to buy these new properties, reconverted from a protected building into accommodation facility, and therefore offer it in the market. Well, I will give you a more detailed explanation later on during my presentation, but I want that you keep and understand the main idea. The main idea is that hotels do not open randomly across the city. So in order to overcome this problem of the endogeneity in my main variable of interest, that is the variation in the hotel room, I will propose a novel instrumental strategy that consists in using the number of protected buildings as an instrument for hotel location decision. And the number of protected buildings in an area makes a good instrument for two reasons. First, because it predicts hotel location across the city. So as I explained, hotels, either in Warsaw, Madrid, Rome, Berlin, in almost any city across the world, value to buy these kind of properties, because therefore, and later they can charge higher prices as hotel guests demand and also value to be host in these kind of facilities. Secondly, it also satisfies the exclusion restriction because hotels are among the few economic activities that can take advantage of repurposing these costly economic structures. So basically, protected buildings, they are not used because they are quite costly to preserve, and therefore only hotels can take advantage of it. Well, as a preview of the results, let me tell you that hotels contribute to business formation in the nearby areas. So in the areas surrounding the hotel. And those effects are heterogeneous. Either across economic activities, hotels openings exhibit a positive impact on tourist-oriented activities and a decrease in production-based activities, and also across the city. So the increase in employment and also in the number of establishments led by hotel openings can be attributed to three key factors. First, the net creation of economic activity. So basically, the market expansion externality is more important, let's say, that the displacement effect provoked by hotel openings. So there are a net effect of new establishments. Second, that the distribution of economic activity from nearby tracts. This is important because I found that hotels establish and create some hubs, some clusters across the city that distribute and pull all the economic activities in the nearby areas. And third, the overall urban development. So the increase in the number of establishments and also the increase in employment led by hotel openings also is due to the expansion of the city. Well, I also find that the hotel impact extends to the revalorization of the real estate in the surrounding of the hotels through an increase in the rental prices and also a boost in building renovation permits. So basically, building renovation permits is residential investment. So here I am finding that hotels increase the real estate market through an amenity effect. So it is not that the case that hotels impact the real estate markets since it decrease or it contribute to decrease the overall stock of housing supply. But hotels improve the attractiveness in the area and therefore impact positively the rental prices. This impact in the rental prices further contribute to reset the urban economic landscape. As I say, it displays financial constraint. It displays a standalone business in favor of financially stronger business groups. So basically, this is the sample of that you may find in almost any city in Europe, but also in America or in other continents. That in the past there were a coffee or there were a restaurant, a bar that was managed by a small owner, and nowadays you find the same restaurant, the same bar, the same coffee, but it's managed by a large corporation. So here I find that not only hotels reshape the economic landscape of the city through a change in the composition of economic activities. There are more tourist-oriented activities and less resident-oriented activities, but also they reshape the kind of economic activities. So the typology and the legal structure of those economic activities. So in the past, they were managed by small owners, and nowadays are managed by large corporations. And the main channel that explain here this is that the increase in the commercial rents. So small owners, they cannot afford to pay the increase in the commercial rents, and therefore only large and financially stronger companies can afford to pay it. So again, the main takeaway message here is that it is as simple as going for a walk in any kind of city, European city, but also American cities, and you may find that in those cities where there are hotels, surrounding these hotels, usually they are chains. They are like this kind of consumption amenities, pizzerias, cafe, bar, that they are not managed by small owners, but they are managed by large corporations. So as a literature review of my paper, well, this paper contributes to two different lines of research. First, it contributes to an incipient line of research that try to identify the economic impact of tourism. Against this background, this paper make the following contributions. First, it put the hotels at the heart of the analysis. So it is true that in the past, there were other papers that have analyzed the impact of certain rentals, like Airbnb, in a series of outcomes. But so far, there were not any paper that have analyzed the economic impact of hotels in the city. And I think that this is important to focus in the hotel industry, since first, is the first player within the tourism industry. And second, we are seeing and we are witnessing such like more and more city councils are banning certain rentals in the city. We have seen the example of New York, also in Amsterdam. But despite this fact, hotels will be persist. Hotels will be stay whatever Airbnb it's in the city or not. So it is crucial to fully understand the economic impacts of this activity. Secondly, I propose a novel instrumental strategy that consists in using the previous hotel building use in order to predict hotel location decision. In this case, I will use protective buildings. And third, I try to understand the impact of tourism beyond business metric through the analysis of the effect in the real estate. So not only the impact in economic activities, but also the impact in other sectors, and also the heterogeneous impact across the city and across the business structure. Well, secondly, and finally, this paper contributes to a more long-established line of research in the field of regional and urban economics that try to understand how the change in the local demand reshape the urban landscape. So basically, this literature has been quite, let's say, American bias and has tried to understand the urban revival of the city centers in the main American cities. And the main channel that the authors have found here is that arrival of young, high-skilled individuals and the increase in the consumption amenities. So we are seeing that there are more and more young and high-skilled individuals in the main American cities that are establishing there in the city centers and therefore are contributing to fostering the number of consumption amenities like restaurants, bars, cafes. So here I want to highlight an additional channel that explains the development of the consumption city, that is tourism. So tourism also contribute to this phenomenon. So it is not only the arrival of young high-skilled individuals, but also the arrival of tourists. Well, as outline of my presentation, I will present now the data, and then I will give you a more detailed explanation of my empirical strategy. After that, I will present the results and the main robustness checks, and I will finish the presentation with the heterogeneity and extension and the usual conclusions. So the data. Well, my main unit of analysis here will be the census tract. So the census tract will be the main geography in this paper. To give you a graph about the size of the census tract and also how Madrid is administratively divided. So here you can see that the census tract is the smallest administrative unit available. Then we have the neighborhoods, and then we have the district. So basically a census tract has around 1,500 individuals to give you a sense of the granularity of this data. Well, my time frame was from 2001 until 2010. Actually, I will use only those 2 years, and I will try to see how the increase in the hotel openings during this period has affected the change in the economic outcomes across those 2 years. Also, I collect a fine-grained data set at the level of the census tract that combines establishment level data, employment data, accommodation data, accommodation like the number of hotel rooms that there were open during this period. Also real estate data like the rental prices at the census tract level, and also the number of building renovation permits and other socio-demographic information. So to give you, I'm gonna try to motivate my research question with a couple of graphs. So here you can see the spatial distribution of hotel room chains from 2001 until 2010. As you can see here, first, hotel room openings are quite scattered across the city. This is a nice setting. This is a nice feature of my setting in the sense that not hotel openings are happening in one part of the city. So they are quite evenly spread. Also, I want to give you a sense of the magnitude of the treatment that we are analyzing here. So, as you can see here, a total of 188 hotels were open during the 10-year time frame, resulting in an increase of a 50% of the previous total hotel total supply. So the increase in the number of accommodation units in Madrid during this period was huge. And therefore, this is nice, this is good in our setting, since I'm expecting to see a change in economic activity due to the impact of this shock. So here you can see the same history in the sense that the X variable describes the years, and the Y variable the increase in the number of hotel room openings. So as you can see here, there was an increase in the number of hotel room openings across the time frame that peaks in 2004, and also an increase in the Madrid hotel overnights. So I put this graph in order to convince you that this paper is not only a supply drive paper, in the sense that it was not only the case that Madrid was growing in size, but also that the Madrid was being trended in the tourism industry. So there were more and more tourists that come to the city. Well, my main regression specification takes the form of a long difference, where my main dependent variable will be the change in the number of establishments or the change in the number of employment between 2001 and 2010 at the census tract level. So I will be the census tract level. My main coefficient of interest will be beta, that will measure the change in the number of hotel rooms between 2001 and 2010 at the census tract level, the effect on the number of establishments, or the effect on the number of employees. So we will have different specifications depending on the outcome variable. I will try to control for some characteristics measured at the pretreatment time, like the number of the population, the proportion of foreign people, the proportion of people holding a bachelor degree, the distance to the city center, and also the change in the number of establishments 3 years before of the treatment. So between 2001 and 1998. So in order to control for some dynamics that they were happening at the census tract level. I also include spatial neighborhood fixed effects. So basically, my beta coefficient will be measured change in the number of hotel rooms across census tracts within the same neighborhood. However, here we may have a problem of endogeneity in our main variable of interest, since it may be the case that there are some unobserved characteristics that affects the location and also the openings of new hotel rooms. And therefore, in order to solve for this issue, I will propose a novel instrumental strategy that consists in using the number of protected buildings measured at the census tract in order to predict the change in the number of hotel rooms between 2001 and 2010. So the number of protected buildings were defined in 1997, so before of my treatment. And protected buildings, as I say, are a kind of facility, a kind of building that due to their aesthetics and also due to the historic value are protected by the city council. So any economic activity that are hosting within a protected building must be first being authorized by the city council, and second, if anyone want to do any change in the building, it is subject to the approval of the city council. And sometimes you cannot do anything with the protected buildings. For instance, if you want to change the facade, you need an approval of the city council. And most of the time, it is going to tell you no, because if it's a protected building, you must respect the facade. So here you have a real example of a protected building that has been converted in a hotel facility. So in the past, you can see here there were a theater, and nowadays it's a theater plus a hotel. So I can give you more anecdotal evidence that this kind of protected buildings being reconverted in accommodation facilities. So here you have also an old palace that nowadays is an hotel boutique. And here it was a protected building that in the past host offices, and nowadays is a 5-star hotel. So they are opening up a lot of accommodation in Madrid, but not only in Madrid, across the world, that are reconverting protected buildings into accommodation facilities. So, in order to give you a sense that my instrument satisfies first the relevant condition and also the second restriction, let me show you the following graph. Here you can see the number of protected buildings in 1997. So the list of protected buildings that I am using in this paper, divided in 4. And then the change in the number of hotel rooms across the city. So you may see here that an increase in the number of protected buildings, the number of protected buildings in the 4th quartile, so the areas where there are more protected buildings are the areas where there are an increase, a larger increase in the number of hotel rooms. So here you can understand this graph as saying thus, okay, so in those areas where there are less protected buildings, there are less hotel openings. But on those areas where there are more protected buildings, there are also more hotel openings. And this is basically the channel that I'm trying to explain here. Well, regarding the spatial coverage of my instrument and my treatment, here you can see the number of protected buildings across the city, and here the number of hotel room openings. And you can see here, there are a part of the city where my instrument do not work well, let's say, that is this area, the northeast of the city. And basically it's because this is the area of the airport. And in the area of the airport, that there were an increase in the hotel room openings in the period, but there were not almost any protected buildings, is a specific area, as in any city in the world, where there are a huge cluster of hotel room openings, but they do not respond to the let's say to the usual tourism flows. So whenever a guy wants to visit a city, usually go to the city center or surrounding areas. But people who go to the airport and to stay in the airport are a different kind of tourism segment. Usually it's business travelers. So in this part of the area of the city, my instrument do not work well. Well, here I do a series of validity tests in order to provide evidence that my instrument satisfies the exclusion restriction. In the first exercise, what I do is to remove all census tract where there were not any hotel room opening, okay? And then I regress the number of protected buildings against the change in the number of establishments and the change in the number of employment. Why I'm doing that? Because during the paper, I am trying to convince you that protected buildings per se do not explain variation in economic activity, but they explain variation in economic activity through being reconverted toward accommodation units. So in those areas where there are not hotel room openings, but there are protected buildings, I should expect no effect of protected buildings on the economic activity outcomes. And I see that this is the case. In the second IB test, what I try to see is to deal with a different confounder. So here, it might be the case that hoteliers select areas in the city that they were already boosting of economic activity in the past. And if this is the case, I am merely picking a trend. So in order to show you that this is not the case, I will regress the change in the number of hotel rooms between 2001 and 2010 against the change in the number of establishments and the change in the employment in the same census tract, but 10 years before. So as you can see here, there is not effect in the number of hotel rooms on the establishment and employment 10 years before. So this shows you that I'm not merely picking a trend. The trend, the increase in the number of establishment and employment, seems to be led by the hotel rooms openings in the present. The third IB test, I'm trying to deal with a different phenomena. So over the paper, I'm trying to convince you also that this touristification, the main phenomena that is explaining my results. But they persist, and also there is a different, but let's say similar phenomenon, the gentrification. And the gentrification, in some sense, can also explain the increase in tourist-oriented activities. tourism-oriented activities, I mean restaurants, bar, cafes. So gentrifiers also demand this kind of consumption amenities. So in this sense, at the first stage, you cannot say, okay, but if there is an increase in the number of consumption amenities is due to the increase in the tourism flows led by new hotel rooms or an increase in the number of gentrifiers. So in order to show you that the main effect is from touristification and not gentrification, I changed and I measured the change in the number of establishment and employment for a select number of activities that has been linked to the gentrification. So basically are the activities where gentrifiers work. And I find that areas where there are new hotel openings do not contribute, do not foster the increase of gentrification activities. So it basically says that touristification activities and gentrification activities are not spatially and temporally correlated. And finally, I want to deal with another issue. Okay, in the paper and in the presentation, I told you that hotels are among the few economic activities that can take advantage of repurposing protected buildings for accommodation facilities due to their own profit. But there are other activities that can also do that, like headquarters. You will probably notice that headquarters are usually settled and placed in protected buildings, in historic buildings in the city centers for signaling reasons. But if it is the case, I also my paper is picking the compound effect of changing protected buildings and reconverting protected buildings into accommodation facilities and also into headquarters. So in order to show you that this is not the case, I regress the change in the number of hotel rooms against the change in the number of establishment, headquarters, and then change in the employment in those headquarters. And I do not find any effect. So basically, this is explained because it is true that in the past, headquarters of the larger firm usually are placed in protected buildings in the city centers, but nowadays this is not the case. Usually the headquarters of the firms, at least in Madrid, are located in the periphery. Well, finally here in the fifth and last IB test, I promise, what I try to see, I try to understand whether the increase in the number of economic activity and employment in the nearby area is due to an increase in the expenditure of tourists. That is the main story here. So there are new hotels, there are new tourists in the area, and those tourists spend money in the nearby areas. But over the paper, I am measured tourists through a supply driver, that is the change in the number of hotel rooms, because I don't have data about the tourists at the census tract level. So one way to recover tourist data at the census tract level is to use Flickr image. So basically, Flickr is a website where anyone can upload a photo. So basically what I do is to web scrap this website. So I download all the site for the city of Madrid. And then I differentiate from photos taken by residents and photos taken by tourists. So I consider a photo taken by a resident, by a tourist, if this user, take a photo from Madrid in a 7 consecutive days, and no photo for Madrid in the whole time span. So for instance, individual eye that goes to Madrid and take a photo on Friday, and then take another photo on Monday, and then across their history, the personal history in the Flickr website, do not take any more photos from Madrid, I will consider it a tourist. Against a guy that take a photo of Madrid maybe in March 10 and then take another photo in April 12, then I will consider a resident. So here I will measure the change in the number of hotel rooms against the change in the number of tourist image. So practically I found that the increase in the number of hotel rooms increased the number of tourists in the area. Well, in the paper, I also try to do some randomization inference in order to show you that the extensive margin is the one that I explained in my results. So basically what I do here is to switch the number of hotel rooms across different census tracts. So, and regress again my main regression specification. So imagine census tract I, there has been 100 new hotel room openings. And in census tract J, there were not any census tract openings. So I will switch. So now census tract I, there are 0 hotel room openings, and in census tract J, there are 100 new hotel room openings, and then regress. So I do this 1,000 times, and here it is distribute the T statistic of my main beta coefficients. So as you can see here, most of the time at the 5% level, the T statistic is not significant. So once I remove the effect of the extensive margin, I do not find any effect. And this is convincing of the correctness of my instrumental strategy, I mean my identification strategy, since if I find a positive effect, it is not the case of an increase or a decrease in the number of hotel rooms, but it is the case that those census tracts per se, there were an increase in the number of economic activities that maybe is explained by new hotel rooms, but maybe not. And here I showed you that once we have removed the extensive margin, we do not find any effect. So, well, here are the main results of my paper. I show you the results for the OLS specification and also for the IV specification. And you can see here, I find a positive and significant effect of the increase in new hotel room openings in the number of establishments and also in the employment. To give you a sense of the magnitude of those effects, of those coefficients, let me tell you that hotels explain the 27% and the 82% variation in the number of establishment and employment in the average census tract during the 10-year frame. Well, you can see here that the effects between OLS and IV are quite similar. Well, in the paper, I do different regression specification. For instance, I change the instrument. As I said before, there are different levels of protection, where protection level 1 is the strongest one, and protection level 3 are the less strongest, let's say. So in the paper, I use this specification, so all protected buildings. But in principle, I can use different instruments depending on the level of protection. And as you can see here, regardless the level of protection, I find a positive and significant effect. And those effects are quite similar. Well, okay, here I want to show you one thing. I didn't tell you, but the employment data that I have at the census tract level, actually, this employment data, I do not have it at the establishment level. I only have it at the establishment level, but by categories. So for instance, if an establishment have 7 employees, it will be within the category of this establishment have between 5 and 10. So in order to impute the employment data at the establishment level, I take different imputation measures, like the minimum, the mean, of the maximum. And no matter the imputation measure used, I find positive effects on the employment value. Finally, you might think, okay, but the increase in employment is a mechanical increase, because obviously if there is a new hotel room opening, there is an increase in the number of employees due to the increase in employment from the hotel. Okay, so what I do here in the specification A is remove all the increase in the hotel employees. And then I redo the analysis, and I find that the magnitude of the coefficient decrease, but not so by much. And this is explained by the multiplier effect of tourism. So basically, tourism do not impact positively the number of the economic activity through an increase in the number of employees in the accommodation industry, but by the indirect effect in other economic activities, like the increase in employment in the restaurant activity, in cafes, in bars, and so on and so forth. So in the paper, I do a series of robustness checks in order to show the validity of my results. For instance, I try to include additional explanatory variables. Instead of measuring the explanatory variables at the pre-treatment level, I measure at the changes. So remember that I have a long different specification, so it's a cross-sectional, and I include also the change in the main control variables. So the variation in the employment, sorry, the variation in the population, the variation in the proportion of foreign people. And I find similar results. Moreover, I changed my main variable of interest. So instead of measuring the change in the number of hotel rooms, I will use the change in the number of hotel opening units. I do not do this from the very beginning, because in this way I could not take into account the size of the hotel. And this, from a, let's say, statistical point of view, is not well done, because you are weighting the same, let's say, a 500 hotel room opening than a 20 hotel room opening. Well, I also changed the structure of my data set. Instead of using a long difference, I use a panel data. Why I don't use a panel data from the very beginning? Well, for two reasons. First, because my main control variables, I do not have a yearly variation. I only have data from 2001 and 2010. Secondly, because of the nature of the treatment. So basically, treatment, the hotel room openings almost happen once in each census tract. So there are not any census tract there are not so much census tract, let's say, that experiment, let's say, more than once hotel room opens during the 10-year frame. So basically, I don't have temporal variation within the census tract. So that's why these two reasons lead me to use a more convenient specification, that is the long difference. Finally, in order to address the potential spatial correlation among the census tract from different neighborhoods, so think about those census tracts, because my main standard errors are computed using as a clusters the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are larger units that they compose different census tracts. So imagine the two census tracts that are in different neighborhoods. And therefore, these census tracts are more prone to be to experiment the same unobserved phenomenon. So in order to take into account this result, I compute Conley error, and I use a parameter value of 2 kilometers that is larger than a census tract and smaller than a neighborhood. Well, I also play a bit with the sample definition. For instance, I removed the city center and touristic areas, because maybe these areas, they are increasing the number of establishment employment for other reasons than the tourism industry. I split the sample period between 2001, 2007, and 2010 in order to see whether let's say, the specific momentum of the data explain my results. And finally, I aggregate the data to different aggregation units. Instead of using the census tract as my main geography, I use commuting zones and neighborhoods in order to deal with the modifiable areal unit problem. And I find that the results are quite consistent here. Well, in the last part of the paper, I try to go one step further and try to understand whether these main effects are heterogeneous across economic activities, but also across the city. And here I found that the main activities that are beneficiated by the arrival of hotel room openings are the hospitality and retail activities, okay? Either in establishment, this is the establishment specification, and this is the employment specification. So basically, these betas are the result of running different, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different specifications, changing the definition of the economic activity. So here we only count health and association, here only economic activities in the education sector. So basically found that the main effects come from hospitality and retail. And within this sector, I find that the activities that are driving my results are tourist-oriented activities. So basically consumption amenities, restaurants, bar, cafes, but also the clothing industry or souvenir shops. Okay, I also try to analyze the effect of the hotel room openings across the city. For instance, here I will keep only observations within the main ring road of Madrid. Why is that? Well, basically, because as I say at the beginning, there are areas in the cities where there are an increase in new hotel room openings, but this increase in new hotel room openings respond to the airport. And this kind of tourist is different from the tourist that goes to the city center or surround. It is mainly business travelers. So indeed, when I filter for those areas, I found that the Fed has increased. And this is mainly because business travelers do not tend to consume and to spend in the nearby areas in the hotels. Think about a business travel, come to the city, go to work, and then when come to the hotel, do not spend time across the city. And therefore, I should expect a smaller effect. In the third specification, I measure differently the change in the number of establishments. Here, I will measure the change in the number of physical establishments. So what is called the business premises. A business premises is the physical store. It might be open or closed, or it might be active or not, but it's the physical store. And I found here that the number of hotel room openings increased the number of physical stores. So this might be explained by the fact that Madrid was growing by that time. Finally, in the last specification, that from my point of view is the most interesting, I try to understand the distributional effects of hotel room openings. So basically, here you can see the different census tract divided in treated, where there were new hotel room openings, adjacent to treated area, the census tract that shares a border with the census tract with a new hotel room opening, and control, that the other group. So basically, I will remove the adjacent treated areas and then re-estimate the effect between treated and control areas. Why is that? Because it may be the case that the adjacent treated areas are also treated. If the hotels perform or contribute to pull all the economic activity toward themselves. And why is that? Because at the end of the day, these hotels are huge. And if I am a business owner, I would like to stay and to establish my business near by the hotel than farther from the hotel. So whenever I reproduce the analysis, here I find that the main effect persists in the establishment specification, but it is wiped out in the employment specification. And this is basically, let's say, a confirmation that the increase in the number of economic activity come from also the redistribution of the economic activity across nearby areas. So I find a net effect, but also this net effect I have to take into account that come from establishments that were in the nearby areas of the hotels, and now they are in the same census tract. Well, the final part of the paper, I tried to analyze the effect in the real estate market, and I found evidence that the effect of hotel room openings positively impact the rental prices. And this impact is through an amenity effect, an increase in the residential investment of the residents, and not an increase in a decrease in the supply. So in the stock of the housing supply. So again, this provides a different channel through which tourism affects the real estate sector. Airbnb affects the real estate sector through a decrease in the stock of the housing supply. But here, hotels affect the real estate sector through an amenity effect, so an increase in the overall attractiveness in the area. And finally, this increase in the rental price can be translated to an increase in the commercial rents. And this increase in the commercial rents can affect differently standalone business and business groups. And indeed, when I disentangle this effect, I find a negative effect of hotel room openings on standalone business and a positive effect in the business groups. And you might think, okay, but this, Alberto, might be a composition effect, because maybe standalone business are those activities that are most affected by the arrival of hotel rooms, and business groups are those activities, maybe consumption amenities, that are more, let's say, most beneficiated by the arrival of hotel room openings. But I'm going to show you that this is not the case. So here you can see the effect for the standalone establishment. And from the standalone establishment, in the hospitality and retail, I find a negative effect in the establishment specification. But when I do for the business groups or the numbers and switch, I find a positive effect. So the effect of the change in the business on the legal structure of the business is within sector. This is what I say at the beginning of the presentation, that nowadays hotel room contribute to chains, coffees, bar, and restaurants that in the past were managed by small owners and nowadays are managed by business and large corporations. And this is mainly to the fact that there are an increase in the commercial rents that small companies cannot afford. So, as the main conclusion and takeaway of my paper is that hotel openings contribute to reshape the urban economic landscape by promoting the growth of the number of establishments and employment in the nearby areas of the hotels. Moreover, the impact of hotel openings extends to the real estate sector through an increase in the rental prices and also an increase in the residential investment. Well, the main policy implication of this paper is that hotels offer a market-driven solution for preserving and revitalizing historical buildings, while at the same time stimulate the economic activity in their surroundings. This takeaway, this main message, this main policy implication, it is worth it not only for developed countries like like in Spain or other countries in Europe, in America, where this phenomenon of reconverting protected building is already happening, but also for developing countries that their governments have more finance and constrained budgets, and instead of spending money in preserve these protected buildings, they can let the private sector to do it for themselves, and at the same time saving money to spend in other let's say more efficient activities, and contribute to the preserving and revitalizing of the area. Well, this paper is not out of limitation. For instance, I do not focus on other negative externalities that are provoked by hotel room openings, like congestion, but also the displacement of local residents. As I say, at the end of the day, I saw that there are an increase in the rental prices, and they should displace local residents. And also, I didn't say anything about the effect of the hotels that they may contribute to a more uniform urban landscape. This is what I say also at the beginning of the presentation, that Madrid, Warsaw, Berlin, Rome, Paris, the city center of those cities, more and more are more alike. And this is mainly due to the effect of the tourism flows. So I hope that you find interesting this presentation, and if anyone has any question, I will be grateful to answer it.